Hey everyone, this is Kevin the Apptrepreneur. Welcome to an impromptu episode of the Apptrepreneur Show. This is a show where we talk about apps, entertainment, pop culture, and life in between. I am your host, Kevin the Apptrepreneur. Now, this video is being done impromptu. Who knows how long it's going to be. But for those of you who are watching this after the fact, if this video is about like an hour long or so, the first 10 to 20 minutes is going to be the most important part, and then after that you can probably safely skip the rest, as it's just, chatting with the people who are live. So, I did not jump on this story when it first came to light that there was a new leaked document called the Uber Files, in which some documents had been leaked, hello Romeo, about Uber's atrocities and how they were like cheating drivers, they were spying on police officers, they were evading law enforcement. I mean, when I heard about this document, I actually didn't say anything because at first I thought, well, this is old news. Clearly somebody just picked up an article from, 2014 or they looked up one of my old videos and then decided to run it as news. But apparently there are new Uber files, like from Australia, that basically not only reconfirms that Uber is a terrible company, but there's a few new revelations to be had. Now, I waited a little while to talk about this because I kind of didn't feel the need to jump on it right away. I've got some other stuff going on right now, hence why there's sporadic live streams for my videos and the llamas. But I did want to say something when some responses had been made, when some more details about the allegations that come up, and if there's really anything new in the Uber files. And apparently there are at least a few new things in the Uber files that have not been discussed on my channel, or if they were discussed kind of in a bubble. We didn't realize how globally the problem really was, even though we might have actually suspected it at the time. So I got this article from Digital Trends. It highlights the 5 most disturbing Uber file revelations that came with the Uber files. And I'm picking this article to discuss because these are also the 5 things that are mostly new-ish. Like I said, oh, I forgot my glasses. We can't do this without the glasses. No wonder my eyes were hurting on the screen. But this is why we, are talking about this one. So, starting the article, Uber might be well synonymous with the app-based ride-hailing system, but the company's history hasn't exactly been a clean slate. From misogynist jokes cracked by founder and former CEO Travis Kalanick and sabotaging rivals by booking fake rides to misuse of a God view technology and underpaying drivers, Uber has had its fair share of scandals over the years. Now the company has courted possibly the most significant controversy in its history. Dubbed the Uber Files, British news agency The Guardian got access to a cache of 124,000 documents containing emails and text exchanges, internal presentations, briefing materials, and memos that reveal a history of extremely worrying behavior and borderline criminal activities that Uber was involved in between 2013 and 2017. Remember that time period on this channel? How there was like a video or two every single day. The revelations were just piling up. Yeah, good times. Kind of miss it, kind of don't. The papers, which were shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and journalists across 29 countries, uncover a trail of questionable Uber tactics across 40 countries during its explosive expansion. Here are some of the most alarming findings uncovered as part of the Uber Files investigation. Now, this was the first thing, and the funny thing is I actually suspected that this was a thing, but I never talked about it because, of course, there was no actual proof that this was a thing, and that's a kill switch. So what's a kill switch? Uber reportedly had a kill switch that instantly killed access to the company's IT systems, preventing law enforcement officials from gathering evidence that could potentially shut down the company's services, seize vehicles, or take legal action against its driver partners. Uber's use of a kill switch was not a secret before, but the latest leaks have revealed that it was used a lot more extensively than previously thought. It was reportedly deployed on 12 instances in France, India, and the Netherlands, among other countries. Uber's top executives, including former CEO Kalanick, are said to have instructed staff about deploying the kill switch. During a raid at Uber's Paris office, computer screens went blank as soon as police officials entered the premises. On another occasion, executives at the raid scene modified the tactic by slowly cutting off access to cloud drives first, followed by killing direct access to internal systems to avoid suspicion. Legal experts say Uber can be tried in court for obstruction of justice in France, India, and the Netherlands for using the kill switch. Now, the reason I always suspected that this was probably a thing, but I couldn't actually prove it, is because if they had a God view, they'd probably have a kill switch. I mean, they were doing some very illegal things that they didn't want people to find, and they didn't want this stuff out there. So it doesn't surprise me that in countries where random raids would be authorized, that they would have a kill switch. It does not surprise me either that Travis Kalanick was one of the people who supposedly authorized it. Here's the second big revelation: lobbying straight from a president. French President Emmanuel Macron, who, full disclosure, I kind of like, was reportedly quite close to Uber's top minds and held multiple undisclosed meetings with company executives, which eventually eased things for Uber's operations in France. During a raid on Uber's office in France, chief lobbyist Marc McGann reportedly told staff that he had asked Macron to get them to back off, referring to government inspectors that were conducting the swoop over alleged tax evasion. Quote, "We had a meeting yesterday with the Prime Minister. Cazeneuve will keep the taxis quiet, and I will gather everybody next week to prepare the reform and correct the law." Kaz accepted the deal, read a text message sent by Macron to Kalanick. The exchange was about the controversial Uber Pop service, which I did use in the Czech Republic and did not like, for the record, that courted intense scrutiny and criticism in France. Following the alleged conversation, the service was swiftly killed in the country, and a push was given to UberX. For UberX, the company reportedly worked in close coordination with staff members from Macron's office and submitted amendment terms to MPs that shared Macron's pro-Uber stance. Soon after the Uber Files investigation was published across multiple outlets, calls for a parliamentary inquiry against Macron over his ties have been raised in France. And look, even though I might kind of like Macron, I think he does some good things in France, at least as far as I know. I'm not a French citizen. Doesn't mean he's above some shadiness himself. That is definitely an abuse of power. He should probably get investigated for that one. All right. Now then, here's the third one, and this actually kind of did surprise me. Not because it seemed like this was something Kalanick would not push, but because Kalanick was so careful to basically say he wanted things to be peaceful that I'm kind of surprised he would push for it so heavily. But on the other hand, he also encouraged people to protest in San Francisco to a pretty high degree. So maybe it shouldn't surprise me too much. And that is that Uber weaponized violence for growth. And according to the article, France was the hotbed of protests centered around Uber. During one such episode that saw multiple attacks and arrests, Kalanick reportedly proposed a quote-unquote civil disobedience stunt involving some 1,500 Uber driver partners and 50,000 riders, but that was not the end of the debate. Quote, "I think it's worth it. Violence guarantees success, and these guys must be resisted. No? Agreed that right place and time must be thought out," then CEO Travis Kalanick reportedly wrote. In the coming days, Uber is reported to have urged driver partners to sign a petition letter urging the president and prime minister to save their jobs. Now that does sound very familiar. While passengers were supposed to be deployed to protest for their access to cheap rides. That also sounds kind of familiar, if I'm being honest. In one instance where an Uber driver was attacked in Belgium, one of the company's lobbyists noted to his co-workers that, quote, "We need to use this in our favor." Uber executives allegedly allowed violence against taxi drivers to go on for a while to make it a big deal and then use it to press lawmakers into passing favorable legislation. Step 1 of the campaign, get the media to talk about taxi violence against. Chief lobbyist McGahn told the executives. Keep in mind, even though I'm saying allegedly, these are all in emails and texts. It's all written down. That's why they have these quotes. That will be important for the end of this video. Here's the 4th revelation. Wooing sanctioned Russian oligarchs. Making inroads into the notorious difficult Russian market wasn't going to be a cakewalk for Uber. But the company tried its best by getting in touch with oligarchs in hopes of eventually making a contact with President Vladimir Putin. In 2016, Uber reportedly sold a stake worth $200 million to Letter One, a private investment firm led by billionaire investors Mikhail Friedman and Petr Aven. According to a report from the Washington Post, Uber then, quote, offered a $50 million deal sweetener that it didn't publicize. Uber hired expensive lobbyists and lawyers to do its job, but the transactions linked to Russia flew around the edges of the U.S. anti-bribery laws. However, the company ultimately failed in its bid to make a splash in the Russian market. As for the oligarchs, with political sway that it wanted to win over, almost all of them have now been sanctioned following the Ukraine invasion. Now, I don't think this would have normally stood out as a huge revelation. Uber has bribed leaders and officials for years at this point. I think the reason this stands out is because of what's going on in Ukraine. And also, Uber, it should be noted, is one of the few companies that have not actually exited Ukraine. They can shut off the service, not in Ukraine, in Russia. They could shut off the service in Russia if they want to, and they should. I believe they should join other companies and countries to basically make Russia a pariah until they stop this senseless invasion. But they don't want to do it, and so I think for that reason, that's why this stands out, because Uber was already getting questioned about why are you still technically in Russia, and maybe now we know why. They spent a lot of money to try to get into Russia. They weren't going to stop. By the way, my wife fell asleep, so if you hear that, sorry. So here's the 5th thing. I love you, honey. Here's the 5th revelation, and this is no revelation at all, but of course it needs to be mentioned because there are the people that get screwed every single time there's an Uber scandal, and they are still consistently overlooked unless we at the very least talk about them, and that is depriving drivers to preserve profits. Of course this is going to be a thing. According to an analyst of the leaked documents by the Washington Post, Uber knew that its policies were far from generous and that the work conditions allowed drivers to barely scrape by. They know this, folks. It's a shame some of you don't know this. I've been trying to help you out, but they know this. But the company continued on the controversial path to keep its own profits intact. The company onboarded more driver partners than it could manage, and in doing so drastically reduced the daily earnings for each driver. Additionally, the system was engineered in such a way that drivers were forced to take risky routes to generate a little extra income, one that even led to death and serious injuries. With Uber and rental car companies taking their respective cuts, and after paying for gas fees, drivers in South Africa could barely manage the equivalent of $1.40 a day. Uber even reneged on promises of helping drivers that were violently attacked in the country. This is no surprise whatsoever. I have made dozens of videos on how little Uber cares. Go back to this channel between 2014 and 2017. This is not news. Now, what have the parties all said about this? Well, obviously, Uber, the company's biggest defense, is that 90% of the people at Uber are new. There is no Travis Kalanick as CEO. There's Dara Khosrowshahi. In fact, many of the Uber founders cashed out their Uber stocks when it got to like $55 a share and became multimillionaires and basically just do philanthropy now. There's no more Ariana Huffington over there. There's no Bill Gurr anymore, although he was by all accounts a pretty decent guy. A lot of the employees who got hired onto Uber, they don't work there anymore. There's new people who work there. That's basically Uber's new defense. Or it's really not a new defense. It's one that's been going on for a while, but this is what they're saying. I'll get to that in a minute. Now, Travis Kalanick, through a lawyer, basically denied everything. The lawyer said that Kalanick was not aware of these things, that Kalanick did not encourage these things, and basically his excuse for why Kalanick could not have wrote any of the things that was uncovered is because it's all texts and emails, meaning Kalanick didn't personally sign off on anything. You know how there's that saying that says, unless there's a signature on it, it's not legally binding? Well, that's being used as defense when, embarrassing texts and emails start to pop up, deny that they were ever written, claim that they were hacked, whatever. No signature on it, didn't happen. Is that defense going to work? I think it's doubtful. While the courts are slow to work, I believe the law is starting to figure out the whole idea of a digital fingerprint. Like, what phone did it come from? Who was that phone registered to? Who was in possession of that phone? What was their carrier? There are ways to find your digital fingerprints all over the place. And I think Kalanick will get caught for this. Now, will something happen? That's another story. Now, as for Uber and their defense that they are a new company, here's actually probably one of the biggest controversial things about Uber, is that Uber basically broke the law until what their product was legal. They were an illegal taxi service. They had unauthorized drivers. These people were not insured the way that you should have been insured in a legal manner. They broke rules. They broke the law. If their drivers got arrested, Uber would bail them out, and they would give them a bonus, encourage them to keep doing what they were doing. They developed software to evade the authorities. They broke rules on Apple's terms of service. For some reason, Apple didn't kick them off. Probably because Uber made a lot of money on the Apple app. If Apple's taking a cut of every ride transaction, Apple's making a lot of money. It doesn't matter if the law was being broken or not. So now Uber is legal. Now there have been new laws that regulate them. Granted, Uber is still fighting those laws because they will not be happy with those laws until the laws are 100% in their favor. But it does bring a big ethical question mark. The more things about their past come up, maybe we should hold them responsible. I mean, the thing is, we don't let mobsters and German soldiers escape their crimes just because, this is how things were at the time. This is how we rolled. This is what we did back then. We don't let them off the hook for that. I read a story about some German Nazi. 103 years old this guy was. You think if anyone's going to care about him, you think they let him go? Nope. Germany tried him. They sent him to jail. 103 years old, and his crimes were decades behind him at this point. And yet, it was still worth prosecuting because it's like, you know what? Just because the world has largely moved on does not mean it was right, and it does not mean there should be consequences. Now that said, will Uber face consequences? Well, here's the thing. If this were America, the answer would be no. Uber has successfully bought enough politicians that they have ensured that that will never happen. They have bought politicians who will always go to bat for Uber, even though they know Uber was built on illegal activities and breaking the law. They didn't buy all politicians, so clearly Nancy Pelosi is not familiar with Uber, nor her husband. Sorry, couldn't resist. But I don't think it's going to happen in America. But here's the thing. These are Australian papers. They involve France. And France is very anti-corporation when the corporation is screwing the little guy. France loves their revolutions. They absolutely do. So the fact that this information has come out and it involves a lot of things that's going on with France, I would not be terribly surprised if France decided to prosecute them over some of this stuff. I would not be surprised if this complicates Uber's standing in the country. I would honestly not be the least bit surprised if Travis Kalanick was basically branded a wanted man in Paris. I mean, I know Paris is just, a city, but like he couldn't go to Paris anymore. He couldn't go anywhere in France. Like now, is America going to extradite him? No, probably not. But what Kalanick did, many French law officials consider personally insulting. He evaded them. He did it deliberately. And he was buddy-buddy with the Prime Minister and President of France. And when he decided to do that, guess what? He made a mockery of the law in France. And France might not take too kindly upon that. So it's going to be very interesting to see if anything happens. And that's probably the biggest revelation of the Uber files, is that it's about countries who might have the backbone to actually prosecute Uber and to say that this was not okay and we're going to do something about it, even if it's a little bit late. We're going to do something about it. I think America should do that too. I don't think America's interested. So anyway, those are my initial thoughts. We're going to kind of keep an eye on this, and I might make a follow-up video if new information comes to life. So I'm going to take this moment to leave. I'm going to get some sleep myself. I'm going to join my wife, who's already fallen asleep. And thank everyone for watching. I'd like to know what your thoughts on all this is. Does it surprise you? Do you think anything's going to happen? I would love to know. Comment below. Like, favorite, share, subscribe. And, as always, flame responsibly. Have a good one. I'm going to reach over and turn this off now.